Each day at 4 o'clock, John McMullen joins the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. All of his Eagles work at 97.3 ESPN.com. It's been a busy day involving quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers, Teddy Bridgewater.
It's my quarterback.
It's all about the quarterback, baby.
It's my teammate.
A lot of guys are getting paid in general this week. Odell Beckham Jr., Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, now Aaron Rodgers. And joining us now to talk all about it is the one and only John McMullen. John, how you doing on this Hump Day Wednesday?
Not quite as well as Aaron Rodgers, but I'm doing pretty well.
None of us are. At least none of the three of us are doing as well as Aaron Rodgers. The fascinating thing to me about the Aaron Rodgers thing, John, is that, and I think to some people this is not very of consequence, but it is to those of us who know about the Packers. They're a different franchise because they are not owned by a billionaire like a Robert Kraft with the Patriots or a Jerry Jones with the Cowboys. This is a shared ownership in the community. So for them, when they guarantee money, that's basically them not just saying we're going to give you money and put it in escrow and all that stuff, but it's also them saying of how healthy their organization is financially to be able to make that kind of investment.
Well, trust me, those people would okay the investment and power. They love that team so much. But, yeah, it's different. But obviously the public aspect of the Green Bay Packers is kind of overblown because other than the piece of paper you get for owning stock, obviously you have no power. So they're run like a typical franchise, and obviously they have the money of a typical NFL franchise, mainly through television revenue, and that's what fuels this entire industry, to be honest. So it's not a concern that they're not going to have the money to pay Aaron Rodgers.
When you look at the money that Rodgers is being given, is there a possibility, John, that in short term, these salaries as they're exploding right now could outpace the growth of the cap itself?
No, it can't outpace it by definition because you can only spend up to the cap. So I think what you look at is the percentage of the cap for positions, and generally that's how teams go about it. I think Aaron is going to be at about 19% now of the cap on his new deal, but also understand that doesn't take into account the built-in increases, which are scheduled to go up. It generally goes up every year because of the escalators in that television revenue I just talked about. So as it stands, I think it's 18.7%. It will slowly go down as the salary cap continues to increase, and that's a heavy burden to pay for one position, even the quarterback position. And we talk about it all the time. The best way to build a championship level roster in this league, and we've seen it most notably recently in Seattle, would be the perfect example because they hit on Russell Wilson as a third-round quarterback. They built this amazing roster. Then when they had to pay Russell Wilson, it slowly started to erode. And the Eagles will be facing that soon enough with Carson Wentz. Same thing will happen. They've been able to build a championship-level roster. One of the major reasons why, even though Carson was a first-round pick, paid far more than somebody like Russell Wilson, that's still very cost-effective when you look at the Aaron Rodgers, the Matt Ryans, the Kirk Cousins, the Matt Staffords of the world.
Yeah, I was asking about Carson Wentz earlier. I think it's interesting that you see Rodgers, a guy who's had some injuries during his career. Already Carson Wentz has had 2 injuries just in his time in the Eagles uniform. You look around the league, Odell Beckham Jr. getting paid coming off an injury. It seems like the league, when it comes to the health of these players, as long as the team is okay with their health, it seems like not to be an issue prohibiting players from getting paid like it would be in the past.
Well, I mean, when you do these things, you kind of have to, in a certain extent, cross your finger because it's something you can't control, injuries in this game. Coaches talk about it all the time. You can't coach in a scared way. Same thing with building your roster. You can't just assume somebody's going to get hurt. And then from the quarterback position as a whole, I think you've seen injuries increase. I think it's another example, I talk about it all the time, of unintended consequences. The NFL is really, really bad at those types of things. And they just sort of have this linear thinking that, well, you think about all the rule changes over the years and the fact that you can now throw the football away when you get out of the pocket. And they give so much protection to the quarterback in the pocket. You can't hit them low. You can't hit them high. And their theory is this will protect the highest profile people in the game. I think it's had the opposite effect because they've made it so hard to play defense against a superstar quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. Defensive coordinators have responded by going after him. So now it's about getting to the quarterback. Whereas if you didn't put all these rules into place, maybe you would have more defense. In other words, maybe you'd feel comfortable playing coverage. Maybe you wouldn't send all these blitzers. And maybe you could get off the field in a different way. So it's just another example of the NFL instituting these things, and everything has a reaction. So the minute you do something, there's coaches who are paid a lot of money figuring out, well, what am I going to do now? And what they've come up with these great quarterbacks, you got to speed them up. You got to get them off their spots. You got to make them uncomfortable. And the only way to do that is to blitz them. And when you blitz them and they get hit, like Aaron Rodgers with Anthony Barr, they might get hurt.
Yeah. John, the other quarterback news today so far has been Teddy Bridgewater traded to the Saints. The Jets are going to get a third-round pick. Jets are sending a sixth-round pick to the Saints with Teddy, but the Jets are getting a third-round pick. It seems like a very understandable move, does it not? Teddy Bridgewater, accurate quarterback, similar to Drew Brees. I remember when Drew Brees got signed by the Saints, he was considered an injury-plagued quarterback. What is Teddy coming off of a major injury himself a couple of years ago? So it just seems like an ideal fit for everybody involved.
Well, I think it says two things. I think it was a great deal from the Jets' perspective. I mean, they're obviously going with Sam Darnold, and it's a better situation to have Josh McCown as a backup. So essentially they spent $500,000 in a sixth-round pick for a third-round pick. That, to me, is pretty good. So I applaud them. From the Saints' perspective, it's pretty clear they think their window is open to be a Super Bowl contender. I think they're probably right. But if you think about what they've done, gave up their first-round pick already for next year, now their third-round pick. Teddy Bridgewater's a free agent next year. I got news for you. He signed a one-year deal. So what are you going to do if Drew Brees continues to play at the level that he's playing at, and say you do win a Super Bowl? Well, obviously Drew Brees is going to be back. So that's a pretty steep price to pay for essentially what they're trying to do is copy what the Eagles had last year, and that's not going to happen again. I think teams that do that are kidding themselves because and I like Teddy Bridgewater. I think a healthy Teddy Bridgewater is a better quarterback than Nick Foles. However, if you think he's going to get as hot as Nick Foles was in the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl at the exact right time, it's not going to happen again. It's not going to happen again for a generation, probably 25, 30 years.
John, news broke yesterday that Alshon Jeffrey is going to miss at least the first two games, avoiding the PUP list, but let's get your thoughts on the news that broke late yesterday.
Yeah, no surprise. I mean, he hasn't practiced. I mentioned it yesterday on the show, and there's 3 practices left until Game 1 against Atlanta. So I mentioned it yesterday. He was very unlikely to play in that game. Yeah. Might be 2-3 weeks, and that's the report. I had heard the entire time that they were not thinking about the PUP list because that would put him out for 6 weeks. They don't think he's going to be out that long. But it's a concern. I mean, that's your best receiver. I think you're going to see a lot more 12 personnel. I think you're going to see Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert on the field early at the same time to sort of make up for it in a different way, because I don't think that wide receiver position is shaping up as deep as we thought maybe earlier in the preseason.
Does this news change roster cuts at all? Are they going to keep an extra receiver now, or this is not a factor?
Yeah, I think maybe, but a lot of people thought they were going to keep 6 receivers anyway. I think they might keep 6 now. I don't think they were going to keep 6 if Jeffrey was completely healthy for week 1. Now, for at least a couple weeks, I think they might keep that 6th guy. But I don't think it'll ultimately matter on game day, as I said, because the guys are going to step up. They're just going to go about it in a different way. I think, as I said, and you saw that in the preseason. They played a lot of when Zach Ertz did play. They played a lot of 12 personnel with him and Goddard at the same time because they had all the wide receiver injuries. I think they're going to go more in that direction. So I don't think it'll mean that much either way on game day.
Tomorrow's a big night for Christian Hackenberg. This could be it for him. I know I asked you yesterday about Joe Callahan.
Did you really just ask that question with a straight face? A big night for Christian Hackenberg?
First of all, you're lying. First of all, you're lying to the whole audience because I am smiling a lot. Second of all, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how much of him we're going to see. I know we talked a little bit about Callahan yesterday, but this could be the last of Hackenberg, is my point, tomorrow night in this final preseason game. And obviously with the Eagles, but I'm talking about in the NFL.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that at all. I think even if the Eagles don't bring him back, and I think there's a chance the Eagles bring him back on the practice squad because he has practice squad eligibility. Remember, when you fast forward to 2019, the Eagles are not going to have Nick Foles. So they're going to want another quarterback, and he kind of fits the mold as a 6'4", 6'5" guy. They like them, but just his arm talent and alone, his size, he's the prototypical guy from a measurable standpoint. So he will get opportunity after opportunity as long as he wants to keep at it. And then you have the AAF coming up and the XFL. He could go that route. I don't think by any stretch this is the last you will see of Christian Hackenberg, even if the Eagles do decide they don't want him on the practice squad.
John McMullen joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. John, you guys were talking about the quarterback position the last few days. I know it's been a hot topic. But outside of what we've been talking about with Foles and Wentz and Callahan, Hackenberg, what are really the positions that you think could be a depth concern for the Eagles? Because we know last year the major reason why they won the Super Bowl was because of their depth, because they lost Peters and Hicks and Wentz and Maragos and all these different guys and Darren Sproles. So is the Eagles' depth up to par? And if it's not, what position or positions do you think the depth is the biggest concern for 2018?
Well, I think the most obvious one is linebacker, where you have 2 proven guys, Jordan Hicks, Nigel Bradham. Jordan obviously is injury prone, so that's a concern. Nigel, you're going to see at week 1, is going to be suspended. He's not going to be out there. So somebody's got to step up and be not only, we've talked about the starting weak side linebacker a lot. Well, against the Falcons, one of those guys, whether it's Nate Gary or Camus Grugier-Hill, is going to have to be a 3-down linebacker against the Falcons. And you're going to see how much Nigel Bradham means to this team. And that's not a lot of depth at that particular position. And then when he goes from those guys, it's people like Joe Walker and Leroy Reynolds. So that is the one position you could look at this team and say there's not enough there. There's probably not enough at the linebacker position. And then I would look to 2 positions where people have kind of glossed over and said the Eagles have significant depth. I don't think it's nearly as good as people thought it was at the beginning of the summer, and that's receiver, because Marcus Wheaton hasn't been healthy and developed, turned into what he once was in Pittsburgh. So that hurts. And then the younger guys, Greg Ward, Rashard Davis, even Bryce Treggs, who the Eagles have liked at times, they've all been banged up. They haven't done much in the preseason. I don't think you can count on them. And then running back. I don't think there is a ton of depth past the top three. And you're talking about, obviously, Darren Sproles at his age coming off a torn ACL. So that's got to be concerned. That's got to be a concern. Jay Ajayi's got degenerative knees. I mean, he's been out of practice now for essentially 2 weeks because he's got bad knees.
Right.
And Corey Clement, let's be honest. I know people aren't going to want to hear this. Another South Jersey kid, love him. He was an undrafted free agent who came out of nowhere and became a Super Bowl hero. But overall, if you look at the sample size, it's very, very limited. And to just assume that Corey Clement is going to be a bell cow back in this league, especially in this division. Look at this division with Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott at the top. I'm not as impressed at the running back position as some other people are.
John, you mentioned a linebacker earlier about how Bradham, he's not going to be playing week 1. Who do you think, who has impressed you more between the preseason and the practices? Is it Camus or is it Nate? Because for me, I think visually right now, at least from my eyes looking at the TV, watching him play, Camus looks more like a linebacker than Gary does at this point in their progressions.
Yeah, I think it depends what you're looking for. I think if you want a coverage linebacker, I think Nate is better. And if I think you want the guy who's going to hold up better in run support as a more traditional linebacker you would look towards Camus, but neither would be good at that. So I think, Jim Schwartz kind of alluded to this the last time he talked to us. He mentioned maybe it'll come down to situations. And I just talked about a third down linebacker against Atlanta. Maybe in nickel situations, it's Nate. Maybe in base downs, it's Camus. I don't know. There's even talk, they've mentioned Ken Flajole, the linebackers coach, had mentioned that there's even a possibility of Joe Walker coming in as sort of the Mike linebacker, then moving Jordan Hicks to the weak side, and then going a different way in the nickel. All these things have been brought up, which kind of tells you they don't have an answer right now. So, it really doesn't matter at this point when we look back and how important Michael Kendricks was to this team, because he's probably going to jail, so it wouldn't have mattered. He wouldn't have been playing here even if they didn't cut him. But it would have been nice if Paul Warlow didn't tear his ACL in his first practice with the Eagles, because that's a veteran guy who has started a lot of games in this league, and I think the Eagles would have been much more comfortable if he was healthy.
John, what about the potential of Malcolm Jenkins playing that nickel linebacker? We saw him play some last year, and they would bump Corey Nelson in at safety. Could Jenkins be an option as well for week 1? Because we know that the Falcons, with guys like Calvin Ridley and Tevin Coleman, there's a lot of speed on the field there. So could it maybe behoove the Eagles, at least for 1 week, to say, we're not going to go with the traditional linebacker next to Hicks. We can go with the safety there.
Oh, yeah, they might do that. There's no question. I mean, that's the beauty of Malcolm Jenkins. He can play almost every position in the back seven. And he can play them well, and he can play them competently. And you mentioned at times they would use him as a second linebacker, whether you want to call it a dime package or because essentially he was playing linebacker, and he was able to hold up. Obviously, in that type of situation, I think it's got to be a certain type of game. Jim Schwartz always talks about games having personalities. And if it does turn into a passing fest, you feel more comfortable doing that. I just mentioned Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley. If somebody's trying to run the football downhill, you probably, as good as he is, you don't want Malcolm Jenkins playing linebacker.
John, before we let you go, I want to get to these Kendricks comments that have kind of been the story here besides him with insider trading, talking about Ertz being the best receiver, and if you blow him up, he doesn't want any part of it. Big V, and the rest of the guys there, he was kind of taking shots, but was he taking shots, or is that just a normal thing for a guy to talk about his former teammates and their strengths and weaknesses?
Not only normal, it happens every week in the NFL. If you have a player who was on the team you're facing, coaches often have them talk to a particular unit. And as far as I mentioned, as far as the mini scouting reports, they were dead on. They were 100% accurate. I mean, Zach Ertz is a great receiver. He's a below average blocker. I've talked about it for years on this show. It's no surprise to anyone. That's what he is, and that's sort of what the modern NFL has become as far as tight end. So there's no issue. Big V struggles with his footwork at times, loses confidence. Everybody who watches them knows that and has seen it in this preseason. And then you have Nick Foles. He didn't even really criticize Nick Foles. He just mentioned he likes to drop it in. And you've seen Nick Foles. If you saw the big pass to Mike Wallace in the open practice at the link, he has this teardrop effect when he throws the long ball and he tries to drop it in. So none of these things are a surprise. It just happens to be that the cameras were on. And, if they were on in the Eagles locker room, Doug Peterson and Mike Rowe were probably telling people about Michael Kendricks and the fact that he's a tremendously athletic linebacker who doesn't have the greatest football IQ, can be out of position at times. That probably went on with the Eagles. It's nothing out of the ordinary.
John McMullen joins the Sports Bash every day at 4 o'clock. You're on 97.3 ESPN. Check out all of his Eagles coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. As John, we are a week and a day away from finally the start of the real NFL season. So we're counting down the days because let's be realistic. Thursday night isn't really football.
I was surprised. Some people were upset when I said the preseason has never meant less than it does now. I was surprised. A lot of fans took umbrage at that. I don't know why, but as Ryan said, I'll try to go down that road. I'll try to be positive. This is a big game for Christian Hackenberg.
It's a slow football week, John. You gotta spin it the best you can.
Well, not slow anymore. I mean, all the quarterback news today just exploded in the last few hours.
I'm joking.
So, yeah, I was joking.
Yeah.
John, always appreciate the time. We'll catch up with you tomorrow.
Thanks, John.
All right, thank you, guys.